And a city lawyer, Esther Bitutu Kadiki, who has been arraigned in connection with the theft of 1.5 billion shillings.
Linked to a 1.4 billion Kenya shillings heist at Equity Bank has been...
In June 2024, as Kenya erupted in protests over the finance bill, something else was happening, quietly. No chaos, no headlines, no alarms. Inside one of the country's largest banks, money was beginning to move in billions. And the strangest part, no customers were being robbed and no systems were hacked. This time, everything looked normal because this wasn't a robbery from the outside. It was happening from within. At the center of it all was a young, respected, and well-spoken Nairobi lawyer. Her name was Esther Bitutu Kadiki. And Esther wasn't just involved in the Equity Bank heist. She was the one building the system behind the genius operation. And in no time, the system she had designed would quietly move over 1.5 billion shillings without raising any suspicion. This is the story of how one of the most sophisticated bank heists in Kenya was allegedly carried out without masks, guns, or any hostages. How did a young city lawyer rely only on her wits, access, and precision to carry out the most daring bank heist in the country? Welcome. This is Dark Hour Docs. Esther lived a life many would consider successful in the capital of the country. She was a commercial lawyer, an advocate of the High Court, and someone who ran her own firm, handling corporate clients and business transactions. She had even been nominated at the Africa Golden Awards for her outstanding practice. On the surface, everything made sense. She prepared contracts, signed agreements, and helped companies move money from one account to another every single day. But over time, Esther began to notice something. In business, money doesn't just move randomly. It moves with a story. Often, a payment is never just a payment, but a salary, an invoice, a supply contract, or even a service rendered. And as long as that story existed, no one asked any questions. That realization alone changed everything. Because instead of forcing money out of a system, one could design a reason for it to leave. And if the reason looked real enough, the system would approve it on its own. So unlike other bank robbers, Esther did not start with hacking, guns, or even directly stealing. She started with structure. Using her legal background, she began creating business agreements between companies. Some were real and others were not. On paper, everything looked legitimate. All the transactions had explanations, all accounts had purpose, and the money had a destination. But behind it all, there was nothing, just a carefully constructed illusion. At first, it was just an idea, a theory. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. If the right system was targeted and the right story was built around it, large amounts of money could move without triggering suspicion. And that's when the idea evolved. She wasn't just about moving money anymore, but about scale of operations. Could her idea allow her to move billions without being caught? But there was one problem. Even the most perfect of systems needed access from within. And this meant access from somewhere inside a bank. This meant that there was a system that moved money every single day without drawing attention. And if she could reach it, the plan would no longer be a theory, but reality. A plan like this couldn't work alone and required access to kickstart the heist. Behind the perfect structure and convincing paper trail, Esther required an insider at the bank to carry out her plans. So she started looking. She needed someone who was trusted inside the bank and could move money without being questioned. And more importantly, the person should already have access to the right accounts. That search led her to David Kimani Machiri. David was a bank manager connected to one of the most sensitive systems inside Equity Bank. He was in charge of the internal salaries remittance account, a system that was designed to process payrolls internally for organizations. The system was important for the heist because companies using the bank moved millions through it every day. The system allowed the approval of salaries and the release of funds to the accounts of employees. Its ability to make such transactions and look normal on the surface made it the perfect cover, because using it for a huge heist meant that transactions inside that system could not look suspicious. At first, David was just another employee. In his years of work, he was disciplined, trusted, and responsible for authorizing payments as part of his job. But that would soon change on encountering Esther. Her pitch to him wasn't complicated. No hacking or breaking into systems was needed for the heist. They only needed to use what already existed in a slightly different manner. For David, payments would still be processed and approvals would still be made. Only this time, the money would not go where it was supposed to. David would redirect the money to their personal accounts, and slowly, he became part of the plan. With him inside, the operation now granted access to Esther to a foolproof system. But moving the money out of the bank was only half the job, because once it left, it had to disappear to prevent easy tracking. And this required the creation of yet another network. So Esther's operation expanded to involve industries to launder the cash, where money could be explained easily and questioned rarely. Her target was real estate, exports, and small private companies. There, she connected with seasoned land scammers who already understood how to make money look legitimate. One of them was Mr. Jeffrey Kiragu, a man who had stayed under the radar despite past involvement in large-scale land fraud schemes. In 2023, Jeffrey had scammed people over 1 billion shillings with the Lesedi developer scam. Through him, a new company was created by Esther, known as Brickways Properties. On paper, it was a real estate business, but in reality, it would become part of the pipeline used to clean the money. The next recruit for the scheme was Ruth Muthoni, a woman well connected to the property world through Banda Home Properties. Ruth helped set up multiple companies, including businesses that claimed to export goods. These were Goodmans Fresh Ltd and Kenfresh Ltd, which were both involved in the export of meat. Again, on paper, everything looked normal, but these companies had a different purpose. They were meant to receive the money stolen, move it, and make it harder to trace. Over time, more and more accounts would be added, and more layers to the scheme were built. And soon, the whole system capable of siphoning and laundering the money stolen was complete. So, inside the bank, money was released, and outside the bank, it could be absorbed, moved, and cleaned. Very ingenious. Esther had created a fully operational pipeline from source to disappearance, which only required correct timing to steal from the biggest bank in the land. By June 2024, everything was in place. The system, the accounts, the people, and the timing couldn't have been better. As Kenya descended into chaos over the finance bill protests, attention was everywhere else apart from the bank. Young people were on the streets of Nairobi, and news coverage revolved around the protests. Inside the banking system, no one was looking for something unusual or suspicious. And that's when the operation began. As planned, the center of the heist was Equity Bank's internal salary system, where payments were initiated by David, who had insider access. The scheme went through just like any other salary transactions, and so no alarms were raised or any form of resistance encountered. What seemed like companies paying their employees, funds being approved, and money being released, was Esther and her team successfully carrying out the heist. When released by the bank, the destinations of the money suddenly changed, away from workers into the network created by the crew. Here, a new player, Mr. John Karima, took over. directed the money to proxy accounts, and moved it into the wider money laundering network. They quietly absorbed the money account after account and moved it to company after company, then later moved the cash again to prevent tracing. They also broke the amounts down, spreading it out to push it further away from the source. Some of the cash was withdrawn, some transferred across banks, and some converted to cryptocurrency. This was an operation designed to make everything disappear completely. And the system worked. They repeat the scheme again and again, and by the time it was over, 47 transactions had been processed. And across those transactions, over 1.5 billion shillings had left the bank quietly, cleanly, and undetected. However, despite their first success, systems, no matter how well designed, always leave patterns. And somewhere inside the bank's internal controls, something did not add up. Despite the transactions looking normal, the details behind them did not. The records didn't align, sources couldn't be verified, and slowly, suspicion began to grow. So investigators within the bank decided to conduct a routine check, which turned into something much bigger. When they looked closer into how the cash was moving, they realized something chilling. These weren't just random errors, but a coordinated, structured, and intentional heist. The system had finally caught up with Esther and her team after this realization. By July 10, 2024, the alarm had finally been raised, and what had gone unnoticed for weeks was now being unraveled, piece by piece. Investigators uncovered the internal system, the external accounts, and the people behind them. The network that had once moved in silence was now being exposed, and their well-laid plans were beginning to collapse. In the end, it wasn't the volume of money that gave them away, but the close-knit pattern behind their operation. The smart city lawyer and her team were arrested, and are currently facing charges on the same. Esther was arrested in May 2025 after presenting herself to investigators. She was questioned by the Directorate of Criminal Investigations under the Banking Fraud Unit. However, she was later released on a 30 million shillings bond as investigations continue. And just like that, one of the most sophisticated bank heists in Kenya's recent history came to an end. This has been Dark Hour Docs, and thank you for watching.